Hey everybody, welcome to hour 29 of HallowCon. 29 hours of something streaming on YouTube, Twitch, and three Facebook channels. Yeah, 5 channels is what we've got going. Our next guest is sitting backstage ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and drag them in here. Hello, Mr. Anderson. Or is it Mr. Anderson or Dr. Anderson?
Whatever you like.
Oh, okay. I like Dr. Anderson. Sounds more distinguished. Okay. I will turn the panel completely over to you, but you are a new face to the HallowCon crew and our podcast we call Stupid O'Clock. So you get the famous 3 questions up front.
Nice.
They are: who are you? What do you do, and how the heck did you get suckered into this weekend?
Well, as my name implies, I am John Anderson, and my background is in Chinese medicine, Eastern philosophy, that sort of thing, and so I ended up getting here in a roundabout way because I wrote a little book called The Way of the Living Ghost, we'll be talking about as we go through the panel here, which is a retelling of one of the seminal classics of Eastern philosophy, and the Tao Te Ching, through the eyes of a ghost, more or less. And you say, well, what's that got to do with horror? Other than the ghostly connotation, of course, you've got that. But what to me is horror about it, or horror adjacent, perhaps, is this idea that the space that we exist in existentially as we are can leave us a bit hollowed out, can leave us in a very strange place. And if we're not mindful of that, we're not aware of that, this lack of control, this otherness in being, right? This is kind of horrific to a lot of folks. So I think there's a horror component in the same way that, magical realism is real enough, but it talks about themes that are otherworldly in a lot of ways, but close enough to still pass for what we might consider real life, so to speak. So this is why I consider The Way of the Living Ghost, and even the stuff that I'm working on past that, to be horror in a lot of ways, because it's sort of the horror of a life lived in a sense.
All right. I'm sort of cheating real quick. I'm trying to get find your page here. I know I've got you I've got you over in the vendors hall. You don't have. You didn't have you listed up as a guest. Let me grab the link for your thing, because I will put it on. I will put it on a crawl at the bottom.
Sure.
Like I said, this is hour 29, so things are getting a little slow, getting a little foggy,
a little fuzzy. Sure.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see the counter up.
I can. Yeah, I saw that. I've been a frequent attendee at many game conventions over the years, so I'm familiar too with that sort of the brain fog and the sort of pressure that comes after about 24 hours without sleep. I can very much relate to that.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to you while I bring up the ticker, and right now I'll go ahead and throw this up. So once you get to talking, once people's questions come up, they will ask questions in the chat room, and we can bring them up on screen. I'll give you a quick thing. See how that showed up on screen. Says Joe's going for a world record here of continuous broadcasts. So I don't know if we're going for a world record, but we're definitely going for a StreamYard record. So we'll be asking your questions that way and monitoring it. So I'm turning your panel over to you till about 8:55.
All right.
All right.
Well, this piece is the Way of the Living Ghost is a piece that is unique insofar as I've seen it, particularly within an English language setting. You might get some techniques, so some Buddhist texts, Taoist texts that might talk about some of the various classes of spirits as they're encountered within many various cultural settings there, um, within the East, and you will get some explanation of what that means, but uh, no one, as far as I know, has taken the the Tao Te Ching, the classic of the seminal classic of Taoism, and given it this kind of spin, given it these kinds of eyes. And we'll notice this theme of eyes and vision as we kind of continue through this. Um, I started writing it maybe 5 years ago. I'd had the idea for many years past that, but I'd started writing it about 5 years ago, and my method was actually quite a simple one. I basically took one of the translations of the Tao Te Ching and started to reinterpret it through um, ghostly eyes. And what we mean by reinterpretation here um, needs to be said that the Tao Te Ching, as with many um, classics of Eastern philosophy, it's focused on how one lives in harmony with one's environment, how one is able to balance the forces that be within the body, yin and yang and qi and shui and these kinds of things that in sum total, help the person to move, to change, to be, to live, right? So when these things are functioning well, you are said to live a good, harmonious life. You are said to live in accordance with the way of heaven, so to speak. And even there, this idea of heaven is something quite different than we might envision it in a Judeo-Christian sense. Heaven is a bit more anomalous in the broad sense, but uh, there is the sense that what one does has um, direct impact on the unfolding of one's life. And many of these texts teach you how to live in harmony and in balance and these kinds of things. There's just one problem. Most of us aren't there. We don't have in our headspace, right? We don't have in the unfolding of our beings this move toward harmony and balance and consistent embrace of change. Most of us don't have that. We are creatures of habit, and those habits, to a greater or lesser extent, can um, determine the direction of life as it unfolds. And so when we talk about this idea of the way of the living ghost, this isn't a direct recognition that one is not living in harmony or in congruence with some higher manner of heaven, so to speak. And again, we should try pretty hard not to confuse this idea with what we the man on a cloud on a throne with angels, this sort of heaven of the Judeo-Christian bent. And so this text is written in the same fashion as the Tao Te Ching, which of course it's directly inspired by. The Tao Te Ching consists of 81 short chapters or passages and no commentary. It is a very short text. I believe it's less than 5,000 words, something like that. And over the millennia, people have given their interpretation of this. And so my text, The Way of the Living Ghost, which is here, if you'd want to take a look at it. This consists of 82 passages because one of the hallmarks of the ghost is that it does more than it should. It tends to put more force into the direction that it is going than it should. There's a pressure there. And so it is arranged in the same manner. I have, in my text, given some commentary to it. It's definitely given more context, depth to it. Reading the Tao Te Ching, or many of the other Eastern classics for that matter, it's very easy to get lost in abstraction. And the living ghost, some of them like that abstraction and they'll be driven to it, and some of them like things very literal and they'll be driven to that. But I'd like to talk about what it is to say a ghost at all in the Eastern context. In Eastern context, there's a polarity of spirit being, so to speak. And on one side, we have this idea of ghosts, and I'll come back to it, which is a grouping of spirits which are denser, earthbound, these kinds of things. And in opposition to that, perhaps, opposition's maybe not exactly the right word, but in contrast to that, we have this other kind of categorization of spirits called the Shen. And these spirits are those lively spirits which keep us alive, which enlighten us, which cause life to be worth living, so to speak. We have 5 of them native to us. They are these spirits are not considered to be negative or kind of external influence. They're just there, and they live with us. We're born with them. In the same sense that many traditions would say you have a soul. Right? This is pretty. This is where this kind of spirit would fit in. It's native to you, and it helps you to go through life. And we have 5 spirits, these 5 Shen, that inhabit, at least in the Chinese context, 5 of the organs of the body, in the same way that you would find the Ba and the Ka in Egyptian mythology and folklore would reside in specific organs. It's the same here. In this case, the Shen, for example, resides in the heart. The Hun resides in the liver. So we have a similar sort of framework to view these things. And again, they're considered not just positive, but necessary to being. They're considered positive because they give that initial impetus for us to move and change and grow through life. The ghost, as we're seeing it here, as a concept, we said, sort of stands a bit in contrast to this. The ghost is that which stays here after a person passes on, but not just that. The idea of a ghost in Chinese culture, folklore, mythology, the term is gui. It can encompass not only human spirits, but gui can be used for any sort of malevolent sort of force that will serve to hold one in place, that will serve to keep one from expressing as they want to, from growing, from embracing change, which is natural. The gui, as a general category, are considered yin spirits, and this is where yin and yang, the balance of yin and yang, light and dark, um, uh, light and heavy, these kinds of things, they interplay here. But they're not just abstract concepts, really. In Eastern philosophies, this idea of yin and yang are actually applied senses that we use, that the body has to progress and move. So when we say that a spirit is yin, when a gui is yin, by contrast, the shen would be yang, and they counterbalance in this way. So when we work with any sort of ghostly idea, in the classical sense, ghostly idea, we're talking about gui. At the same time, gui is demons, right? In a theological sense, demons that we might understand from the Judeo-Christian perspective. Gui is malevolent nature spirits, right? Any of your forest goblins, your mountain sprites, and these kinds of things would also be considered, to some extent, to be a form of gui. And so, generally speaking, they're accepted as natural parts of reality. The idea of supernatural within the Eastern context is almost non-existent. They don't have a sense of something that is over here versus the sort of, this is real and this thing is not, right? Supernatural for them merely comes down to how weird is it in comparison to what my everyday life is. What is the impact that it has on my life? And we'll see that many of these forms of beings, many supernatural beings, are not considered something other. They're just considered something weird, very strange. And so we have in this dichotomy, right, still this balance of yin and yang. We still have this recognition that the world is populated with spirits. The world is, to some extent, run by them. And that they can have a literal impact on the world. So how do we say living ghost then? If we're talking about a ghost being something, a gui being something that is heavy, something that is quite fixed in its nature, what do we say about a living ghost then? Because obviously a ghost might be something that is or isn't, it's not going to fit the same category of living or dead, so to speak, that we tend to have in the West. Well, we see in the language itself, in the Chinese language, the term gui used for individuals who are involved with any sort of addictive or repetitive behaviors, any sort of behaviors that are that sort of have their own inertia. So someone who is a heavy, consistent drinker, the jiu gui, a wine ghost or a liquor ghost. Someone who is a glutton or is greedy is a chan ghost, right? So you have this idea of ghostliness even within everyday actions that can color how you see reality, can limit how you move about within reality. And so this is what the living ghost is in this sense. A person that is alive, a person that is, biologically there, but for whom the tenor of life has been narrowed down to a very sort of specific path, often one that they're stuck in, often one that they didn't choose. You can probably make the case that perhaps some people do choose some of the things that are ghostly. The military is one case in which you can be led to being hollowed out. We have traumatic things happen in the military to our troops, right? These folks are hollowed out by their experience in a lot of ways. They did choose that, but they wouldn't necessarily want to have that hollowing take place. So there are often some component of choice to begin with, but afterward, the movement takes a life of its own, so to speak. And we must come to a point of recognition there to understand we might have this sort of ghostly nature. And so I'll actually read some passages too from this. And one of the things I want to actually show you with this text is visually, it's inspired by cataract, a clouding over of the eyes that some folks will get as we advance in age. This means that you might see things, you're going to see things, but you're going to see them in a hazy way, in an unclear way, right? So, in the same manner as this, the ghost sees the world through hazy lenses, hazy eyes, dirty windows, so to speak. The eyes are the windows to the soul, right? So in this case, the ghost has very dirty windows, so to speak, and it causes ghosts, and in this case, living ghosts as well, to see things in a very, very specific way, and they can't see another possibility around it, or they can't see what something different might look like. So I'll just flip to a passage. And if we want to take a look at the inside of it real quick, here we go. We've got both Chinese and English represented here. This was a stylistic choice. I think it's an interesting visual representation, and a lot of the translations of the Tao Te Ching will also have Chinese text on one side and then English on the next. But this first one I'll read is passage 25, called Mistrust of Change. Truly, misery has no place upon happiness. Try, absolutely, resolutely, to present catastrophe or unwanted experience. Maintain your happiness and know that it can always be so. Gird yourself against all possibilities and take only that which would benefit you. Do not let change come easily to you, for this will only further invite catastrophe. So in this passage, in this short passage, we already see this theme of not wanting change, not accepting change. We see this in sort of the Western concept of ghosts in the image of, being to uh, chained to a place, stuck to a place. Whenever we hear stories of ghosts, particularly in the West, we have, if you watch these reality haunted house shows, and these, it's always the ghost goes into one section, walks through the wall, and then goes away. And then the next night, they walk through in the same manner, in the same place. They're stuck there. They're a pattern. They're a recording, so to speak, that can't stop. And whenever, if any of you do any ghost hunting or parapsychology of that sort, you'll recognize right away that most of the things that people would consider, oh, this is a ghost, it's closer to being a bit of recorded information than an intelligent sort of free agent of its own, working of its own force. And so for the living ghost, there's this recognition, not just of tradition, right? To have tradition is fine. Tradition gives you a way to scaffold your world, to scaffold the experience that you have. But tradition can very quickly become solidified. It can become crystallized, so that all you know is the tradition, and you can't move past that. You have trouble processing anything past that. So this is one of the big hallmarks of a ghost, of the living ghost specifically. Commentary of the same passage. Change is a source of mistrust. However, the living ghost, who embodies this attribute, has a broad mistrust of all things that do not stem directly from itself. This ghost believes that all things, once they become manifest, should, in fact, remain the same, now and forever. The ghost considers resistance to change to be a source of positive influence on the world. As such, new ideas and the changes which they invariably bring are a source of fear and trepidation. Tradition is strongly valued, as is ritual and ceremony. These are often the means by which tradition is upheld and transferred to others. Any variance from the norm produces either anxiety, as the ghost tries to reestablish itself in its normal routine, or anger, as it attempts to resist the change on its face, and thus change may be the only factor in the anger felt by the ghost. This ghost will find anxiety in most things that are considered new or state of the art. Right? It does not like newfangled aspects of life. It wants to go back to the quote unquote good old days. It sees only the good old days. This is this idea again of the eyes becoming clouded. The ghost only sees what it knew to be the right thing back then, and everything else is an aberration. Right? This is not something that you want to keep. Technology is perplexing, if not overtly disturbing, to the ghost. Adaptation of any sort, in fact, can be sufficient to cause the heart to become even harder and the mind more resolute as a reaction to change. In Eastern philosophy, the heart and the mind are considered one thing. The muscle that pumps blood is the heart, yes, but there's another deeper component to it that allows for consciousness and awareness. This is the role of the heart in Eastern philosophies and even medical context. And so when the ghost is unable to allow for change, it causes the heart to constrict, as the heart is that which is responsible for coming into acceptance of what is, coming into acceptance of what is to come, and planning for what might be past that. And so we see this idea of mistrust of change, this idea of lack of fuller vision, future vision perhaps, a lack of want for change, and the impact that this constriction can have on the whole of the individual. We'll go to another passage. Are there any questions? I don't see any there, so.
No questions quite yet.
Okay. We'll go to passage 29. The cultivation of institution. What is well planted is not uprooted. What is well preserved cannot be looted. Raise your children and your grandchildren in the ways that you have learned. Let your habits become theirs. Cultivate pattern in your home, and that you will be. Cultivate it in those around you, and so shall you live long. Cultivate it in the world, and so shall you become immortal. Therefore, against yourself measure others. Against your accomplishment measure others. Against your home measure others. Against your culture measure others. Let judgment be your guide. This is a strong base, and not all things are equal. So with institution, with the want to establish yourself in the world through repeated behavior, through repeated pattern, such as what a ghost does, there is this tendency to go, I know my thing, they know theirs, and theirs is not mine, and so therefore this is not a good thing. I don't like it. And so when we choose to not only establish repeated patterns over and over and over and over, and further to measure our patterns, our beliefs, and our movements against other people, right? There is this tendency to solidify yourself. And this is not only an existential thing. This is from a Western context. This is how one becomes a ghost. The more and more that you tend to repeat your patterns, that you tend to lacquer over, layer over again and again and again, that particular part of you gains gravity. It gains a weight that you don't always control afterward. So this is part of how we actually become a ghost, right? Even in the discarnate sense. Not only we're talking living ghosts here, but we mean in the broader sense of Gui we mentioned earlier, the heavier yin spirits, the darker spirits. This happens because this repeated energy gets put in, layered on, layered on, layered on, like a pearl, so to speak, and it over time gains its own weight. So after a point, you are almost being pulled down by something you might have started, but after a point, you will get consumed by it.
John, I have a question for you personally.
Sure.
When these ghosts repeat the same cycle, like I live in downtown Nashville, and there's always the same set of ghost stories. Like if you look in this bar window, you'll see this girl pass by,
Mhm.
every night around midnight. Is that part of that regenerative cycle that they gained enough energy back into their being to cycle back through for the day, and then they vanish to become to become that apparition again? Or how does that energy cycle work as far as the Eastern view goes?
From the Eastern perspective, uh, we do have the sense that ghosts are yin. We just said that part. Uh, but even anything that moves must have a little bit of the counterbalancing principle yang, right? So even something that is very yin must have a little bit of yang in there somewhere. Um, when it is uh, when it is something that is merely repeating, the girl passes by the window. You look in the bar, and there's this girl passes by the window. I'm inclined to think that that's something like, just uh, an artifact or residue of sort of a recording process. Um, in the same way that if you recorded it over uh, VHS tapes many times, right, you'll get certain parts of the scene, but then in the background you'll see kind of laid in parts of a scene from a previous recording. So I tend to view it that way. But in order for even that to take place, there needs to be some aspect of this yang. And I suppose that's a metaphysical question to say, well, where do they get it from? Um, I don't have an answer for that one as such. The recordings of things like that seem to be like recordings are, uh, they're viewed as gwei, but it's not the same thing as a thing with agency that can affect you, talk to you, that kind of thing. Where, you know, if in this case this young lady um, can communicate with you while you're at the bar or something like that, that requires relatively much more yang, and they're a bit more free.
So she would have more freedom, say, if she would be able to make the room cold or to put a scratch on your arm or something of the sort.
Right.
She would have to have that more rooted yan abilities.
Yeah, that's correct. And the more that you're able to do that, the more, relatively speaking, the more you must have. And the more of that you must have, um, it comes from somewhere. Sometimes it comes from, um, depending again on what we're talking about, it may come from um, feeding them. In the Eastern culture, it's actually very common to feed ghosts so that they don't become kind of wayward or ne'er do wells. Right? It's very common to leave out offerings for them, so they treat you nice, and you're treating them nice. You're feeding them, so they therefore leave you alone. They don't generally treat you nice. They generally just leave you alone. Uh, so it might come in that form where someone is retelling that story, or, oh, let me tell you about Katie, and she used to be at this bar, and so that might be part of the process.
So you're telling me that the retelling of the incident or the story gives new life to that recording.
Yeah.
Wow, that's actually really powerful.
Yeah. So this is why, in my opinion, one of the strangest things to do from my perspective is to do battle reenactments, for example. I understand it. I understand why people do it. I've been there for many of them, actually. But from the Eastern perspective, that's considered, it's not really a great thing to do unless what you're doing is going to give them offerings and take care of them afterward. And most of the time, if you go to a reenactment at, Gettysburg or something, it's not, that's not the goal of it. So yeah, you can have this sense of sort of reinforcing that the gravity of that over time. But again, most of that stuff is kind of a recording. It doesn't have a freedom, so to speak, to really move. And there are some spirits which actually do have the freedom to interact, move, and even learn. They can learn from one another. So you might see this happen when if you have been in an area long enough to know the folklore, and they have this character A, this ghost A, has these characteristics, and then ghost B also has some kind of different characteristics, but there are a couple of themes that are in common. Eventually, the two of them sort of meld together to form a third thing. And in terms of the energy of it, the Chinese would say the qi of it, spirits can learn from one another, and particularly those things which are not just going back and forth in a cycle. Those things which can move around, they have agency, they have force, they have gravity. So this ability for them to actually move and change and learn, and I don't want to use the term evolve, but maybe adapt to certain situations. It's there within the Eastern context, and even Native American context. You'll see this as well. You'll see many of the spirits. Certain kinds of spirits hang out together. They sort of like each other, and they can learn from one another. So it's not just okay, this class of spirits and this class of spirits and this class of spirits. It's considered an ecology, right? It's considered a community in a sense. So from the Eastern perspective, and from, I should say, an animist perspective in general, we're swimming in a world of spirits. Right now, we're swimming through residues of things that have happened. Occasionally, we'll bump into something that actually could do something to us, but generally speaking, it's residual stuff, and not something to be too concerned about. Generally, if you are intact enough, if you have enough of your own yang energy, and you're balanced enough, they honestly can't do much to you. People are very, very frightened of things, but they're frightened of things that they don't understand, and two, things they don't think they can control. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But to safeguard yourself, to protect yourself, is nothing more special than taking care of yourself, making sure that you remain vibrant, right? Find things like joy, and be awestruck, to find some kind of feeling of wow, something as simple as this can be sufficient to protect you. But if you go about the world thinking that everything's out to get you, this thing and this thing and this thing, and it's all, the evil eye, something's going to get in there because you're letting your own resources scoot away. We have, as we mentioned in the beginning, we have 5 native spirits in the Eastern context, which they live within us. They're native to us. We're born with them. And it is their job to keep us clear, to keep us safe. In order for that to happen, we must work with them. And that can be, what that looks like can vary depending on what we have learned about those spirits, or what they mean to us. For me, I actually interpret them as 5 independent entities which form a composite, which is my psyche. right? It's not just their mental capacities, but in other, other folks believe that those what are called 5 Shen are just 5 mental capacities that we have to, um, you know, to use and perceive the world. That's okay. My interpretation is different, so it means I work with them different. But in both cases, the working of those Shen is what keeps us, to a large extent, safe within the world of this kind of unseen world, right? But to the Chinese folks, this is not supernatural. There is a recognition in most pre-modern cultures. We'll call it Eastern, Western, whatever. We'll just call it, pre-modern up to continuous time. There's a recognition that we live in a space where, yeah, there are some things we can't see, but which they're not separate from the world that we live in. And it's when you start to make that distinction that, ghosts are supernatural, or spirits are supernatural, or myths and legends or something over there. They have their force and they have their power, certainly, but they're acting within the world that we live in, right? This is the world that we're in. It's not really supernatural. You might use the term paranatural or something, or preternatural. Okay, it's a little weird. It's different, but it isn't something completely other. And getting back to your question about this lady in the bar that you might see if you pass by just right now. Of course, I think those tales are common to every town. The town that I'm in right now has, if I go downtown right now, I can pass by probably half a dozen buildings where if you know the folklore, if you look at that window right there, you'll see that furniture mogul, or if you look right there, you'll see that guy who jumped off and did such and such. This is, I think, it's ubiquitous. It's common to most locales. In some traditions, even this has its own force, I guess, or impact, because in some traditions you might have so that recording would be considered just alive enough to move, but not really alive enough to do much else than that. But there might be something else that is in the area that might feed on that. There are some traditions where that's, spirits feed on spirits. Here I'm thinking of particularly the concept of the Kiumba, as it's found in Afro-Brazilian magic. This is what we would consider a shade or a ghost of a person, but not really fully formed. But that other spirits, when they find them, they'll feed on them. They're like sharks and fish. So even these kinds of recorded things can give force or impetus to other things within the spirit ecology of the space.
Yeah. All right, a slight follow-up to that. Do you
Sure.
think there are people either positive enough in their lifestyle or negative enough in their lifestyle to will some of these recordings, or to heighten the recording's awareness of its presence in the world, if that makes sense? Like, to bring them upon the world?
To bring them to a point of awareness such that they can do something on their own?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I think it's fair to say. I don't know of any particular example of that off the top of my head, but in terms of what I'm talking about from an Eastern perspective, it's all energy. It's all chi, right? And thank God, I don't have any other folks who are dealing with a lot of Eastern concepts, because a lot of people would cringe when I use the translation of energy for chi. But but it's all putting force towards something, and if you've got enough yin, right? We said that a lot of those ghosty things are yin. If you've got enough yin, it acts like glue, or it acts like a gravity well, so it causes that energy to be sucked into the center of that yin. So if you keep adding to it, it's going to do this thing. It's going to get larger and larger, and eventually there's, I guess, enough of an organizational structure that this might come through. It looks like we're nearly short on time.
I know.
That's good. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Because I studied just for a very brief moment Qigong and, the energy healing and things like that.
Mhm.
And I wondered if that actually translates into the no longer with us or differently with us beings.
Sure. Yeah, certainly. I think that there's the case to be made for that. Again, I think it really depends on what your tradition is as to what you end up doing with that qigong or tai chi or whatever it is that you're working with Reiki or however you want to term that. But it's when you put chi into the world, you're going, like, something is going to pick that up, and if you're working with the sort of otherworldly or the unseen or the preternatural or however you want to call it, the chi that you walk about with in the world actually affects that. Can't see that.
Let me hop back in. Sorry about that. This is from John, one of our resident admins here. It says, being as a working class clothing suit and tie hasn't really changed much in the last 100 years. I wonder what about the people standing around downtown? Are they real people or spirits that are still punching the time clock and have passed on?
Oh, yeah, I think it's fair to say. I know that I mean, if you want to become a ghost, one of the easiest ways to do it, I mean, my book aside, and that's certainly there, just do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over for 50 years. That activity wears a groove in reality, like if you play the same song on a record over and over and over, you're going to wear those grooves out. You're going to wear them deeper in. And eventually what's going to come through is going to be really muddy. So you're
telling me there's a lot of salarymen in Japan that are just roaming because they did the same 9 to 5 for 65 years and didn't know anything else about life.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of chi, yes, you're not going to get rid of it. Now, whether they're walking around as distinct individuals or whether they're sort of currents or eddies in a sort of fluid field, I don't want to necessarily say you've got millions and millions of intelligent, ghostly things, but certainly there's going to be some layers and layers and layers of residue. Sure, yeah. Any old space, well, frankly, all space is old space after a point, unless you've really done work to clean it out or to really change its tenor over time. It's going to have the grooves are going to be in there, the gravity is going to be in there. So you can have, even still, I mean, yeah, and you can have this come about while you're alive. I mean, this is the whole, how do we want to say it? The fascination with making sure things are done just so, or tradition for tradition's sake, or maintenance of the same thing over and over for the sake of that, without changing it. This is the way of ghosts, living and dead, right?
That makes a ton of sense. I do hate to cut things short.
Yeah.
Dan Hollyfield says, "Thank you for an enlightening lecture,
Hey,
Dr.
no worries.
Anderson. It's a subject towards which I've been largely ignorant until today." So thank you, Dan, for that. And we have a couple of minutes left, so I know it's not always customary to repeatedly, spout who you are and what you're all about in this nature, because pride is a powerful thing. But tell us, where we can find your book, where we can find you online, and it's been great talking to you.
Oh, I've really enjoyed this. This is different than the normal context in which I do this. I teach this sort of thing too sometimes, so it's quite different to do a bit more informal thing. But you can find me. You can find The Way of the Living Ghost on Amazon. You can find it on all your big box online companies, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. Sure. If you want to go directly to the publisher, you can go to Revelor Press. They would be delighted to have direct orders from them. This is the fourth book in the series of folk necromancy that's produced by Revelor Press. All of those texts are covering some aspect of necromancy or work with spirits as it's found across many cultures. I only have the fourth volume, so it's not all of them are mine. You can find me on Instagram at sanjunzaming. I'll type it in the notes if you'd like. You can email me at sanjunzaming at Gmail. That's fine. Facebook, my author's page is John Anderson, Oddities, Eastern and Otherwise. I think that should be in show notes somewhere. I haven't got a website up quite yet, so we'll get to it as the next material come out.
Your medicine.
I've got 2 more follow-ups to come after this one. So if you pick this one up, you can expect more to come, as the next will be focused on how to regain your humanity, so to speak. How to regain that other part of you that maybe being ghostly takes away.
Excellent. Thank you once again for stopping in. And
Yes, thank you so much. I've been behind the scenes working on some stuff, trying to get stuff ready for the next panel. Thank you for coming in. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Up next is our rip scenes. We got to
we got to get a good name.
Yeah, we got to steer around the copyrights and stuff. But yeah, we're going to be making fun of a classic movie called Little Shop of Horrors. We got to do a stream reset, so we will be seeing you in just a few minutes. Thanks everybody. Thank you, Dr. Anderson, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
And let me find my coffee cup because I'm out of coffee. So let's get some coffee while